We have an expert with us, and our expert today is Melody Irving with the Lane practice. She already introduced herself, and we know now she's a night person. And the structure of her practice is that they have 3 advisors and 5 staff. They have an administrative assistant, a business processor, 2 case managers, and a receptionist. And Melody, would you mind restating, I know you did, at the very beginning, but restating what your role is in the practice?
Client service specialist.
All right, thank you. So we want to move on to our objective today. And what I want to share is just a little bit about the goals that we want to accomplish. So what's our point in having this call? What do we want to make sure that we address? And the goals for the call are that we make sure everyone knows the purpose of the tool and provide an understanding of the advantages of it. I will tell you right up front, most of you have had exposure to it and know what it's like, and know that it takes time to complete it each month. So it's one of those tools that takes a little block of time, but in the long run is really worth the time. So we want to look at what makes it worth that time, what are the advantages, and we want to make sure everybody's comfortable in the best practice uses of it. So, including sharing with one another, that's an important piece of this, is sharing some things with one another on what you have found to be really helpful in the tool. So what is the systematic payouts tracking tool? It basically tracks the scheduled payouts from client accounts to make sure the source account, and you'll notice on the slide there's a plural there because sometimes there's more than one source account. We want to make sure that those source accounts consistently have enough cash in them to make sure the payouts happen. So it's basically the lookout for the accounts. So why is the tool important? The biggest top item on it is that it helps ensure payouts are not missed. So we're just making sure those go out because we know how unhappy clients would be if their payouts didn't happen as planned. And so it allows potentially insufficient accounts. So when they come up, they might not be insufficient yet, but we want to take a look at them ahead. So potentially insufficient accounts to be noticed in advance so that they can be corrected. And something that I want to make sure that everyone is well aware of is that the tracker rounds up. So you need to check the actual cash balance amount if you see that there's one draw remaining. So if draws remaining shows 1.0, you want to verify there's enough to fund the draw. Because if the draw is for $1,000 and there's $995 in the account, the tracker will round up, but the payout wouldn't go because it would be $5 short. So we have a poll question that I would like to ask everyone. If there's one draw remaining, do you check the actual cash balance to make sure there's enough to fund the SPO? So if you would choose, please, and included in the answer is one, I didn't know it rounded up, because that might be new news to you. If you would choose your answer. And we have almost half of you that do check that, and then, excuse me, a little bit more than half of you that didn't know it rounded up. So I'm glad that that came up today. And so since the tracker rounds up, for those of you who answered that you do check it, for what number of draws remaining do you review the account? So actually that's a question to all of you, even if we're not talking about the 1.0. What number of draws cause you to notice and check the account? Melody, maybe you could share, is it, so my question is it 2 point, is it anything less than 2.0, or what triggers you to make sure you go and double check that amount?
Well, I will be completely honest with you. After I say this, you might wish that you didn't pick me as your expert today. But it wasn't until recently that I started paying a whole lot of attention to that column, draws per year. I would refresh the tracker, and the clients that came up after doing the refresh, I go through and update all of them, regardless of what that draw column says. However, in the past maybe 4 or 5 months, I have been looking more closely at that column, and we usually look at the ones that have 1 or 2 draws.
Okay. Well, and that's fair enough.
I still do it by refreshing it first, but I just pay extra close attention to those that have 1 or 2 draws in there.
Okay, great. And when we get into the piece of talking about your process, I think it'll bring clarity to everyone too on how you've got others on your team that are looking at it. So that affects that. They probably look at that piece as well. Anyone else want to share what number of draws triggers you to make sure you go and review?
I can share. This is Tara. Usually at our weekly recap meeting, if anything is 3 is usually when we look at, depending on the client, because some clients have combined SPOs, so we have to add them up. But mainly it's 2 or below.
Okay, great. Anyone else? All right, we will move on then. So I would like now to get into, Melody, what your process is. And I could sit here and read through the bullets on the slide, but I think that it would help everyone and be able to discuss it as you go. If anybody has questions, feel free to speak up. If you would, please walk through the basic steps you take when you're updating the tracker.
Sure. Well, I update it once a month, and what has just worked for our practice is I usually do that in the middle of the month. And like I said before, I start out by refreshing the tracker, and I just go through and update every client that shows up after doing that refresh. And as I'm updating it, I always pay attention to the account type. I know that if it's an active portfolio or an annuity, that I'm going to enter the total account value and not the cash balance. And
Great.
if it's a 1 account, then you are going to enter the cash balance. And if it's an SPS account, you're going to look to see if there are arrangements set up in that account and if the SPO is actually being pulled from a fund. And if so, you're going to enter the amount that's in that fund. And what works for me is that I try to detail all of that in the details column, so that when I go through it the next month, I have those notes there, and I'm not, having to go back
Reinventing, right?
Exactly.
Reinventing it,
right? To make it more time-consuming than it already is. So.
Right, and we're going to take a little closer look at what you do for that in just a few minutes. And So you refresh it, and then you email your case managers, right? And they take next steps?
Yes.
Okay. So if there's anything that's low that needs any kind of next action for replenishment and that type of thing, the case managers actually take that step, correct?
Right.
And then your team itself goes over it every week during the weekly recap, you had stated, I believe, right?
Correct.
Okay. I'd like to throw out a couple of discussion questions for everyone while we're on this. Do any of your teams, any of the other teams participating, split the refreshing and the review? So how is your team tackling it? Does one person refresh and another review, or is it all the same person? If anybody would like to speak to that.
I can. This is Tara. I'm the one that does that all. So I refresh it, and when we update it, I put it on contact manager for the client's next appointment. And so when I'm prepping also for that client, let's say it has to be done in a few months, then I'll put it on the action sheets, and so that they discuss that during the meeting. If it's something urgent that is way before their appointment, then I would just email them, or the paraplanner and Sherry as well. But I'm the one that updates it and is the one that recalls that.
Gotcha. Great.
Yep.
Anyone else want to share on how you handle that piece of it? All right. I also wanted to ask, do you review it in your weekly recap meeting every week or in some other frequency, perhaps once a month? Or how about that piece of it as far as the review with the team in the weekly recap? Carrie, do you guys do it weekly, or how frequently, or once a month, or?
We don't really, I don't think we review this one in our weekly recap meeting.
Okay.
I do this about the 15th of the month also, and then I send it, and then our paraplanner, I'm not sure when she updates it or her role exactly, because we haven't talked about it, but we don't really, if there's any issues or anything with it, I know she takes care of that, so we don't really review it in our weekly recap meeting.
Okay. We do recommend that that is a best practice. We recommend generally that it be reviewed in the second week of the month, first week of the month. If you've completed it by the end of the month, then the first week of the month works well. With those of you who are completing it mid-month, then you could review it in your weekly recap meeting toward the end of that month. So we would recommend that you have a consistent time. If you have consistently refreshing at mid-month, then just you could consistently review it in your recap at the end of the month. And so for those who look at it every week, it's just kind of going above and beyond, and there's nothing wrong with that to keep it in your sites. All right, now continuing with Melody's process. We've already mentioned that you refresh it in the middle of the month, and Melody, then you also said that you split it between 2 days. So would you share both why you choose the middle of the month and why you divide it between a couple of days?
Well, as far as why we do the middle of the month, it's really no. When I was trained to do the SPO tracker, that's just what KMG told me to do, and that's just what I've always done.
Gotcha.
And it works for us. And I do divide the SPO tracker into 2 days just because it is a long tracker, and that's more of a personal preference, I think. I do half one day, and then the next day I go back and do the other half.
And how do you split up the half? Do you do it alphabetically, or how do you know where you left off?
The first day I just start at the top and I go down, and I usually do like A through M, and then the next day I pick up and do the rest of it.
Okay, great. That makes sense. I know it is, like I mentioned early on, it is one of the time-consuming ones to do. So does anybody else split it up like that, or is everyone refreshing it monthly? How often are you guys refreshing it?
This is Carrie, and I refresh it monthly, and I try and get it all done in one day, even though it does take a long time because it's a long tracker.
Right, so just get it over with.
Yeah, definitely.
At midnight while you're watching Netflix and working remotely. Okay. Tara, any additional input for you?
Yes, I do it monthly, and I do it just that one day, and usually I try to do it around the 1st of the month, but sometimes it is the 15th. It kind of just depends on what's happening. But it's on Task Manager. So.
Okay, and do you guys then review it at a particular time in recap? Or?
We usually, during weekly recap, if anything shows up, then we kind of review it. But usually we know in advance if something needs to be done. Like I said, it's on the action plan. So.
Right, so you've already tackled it usually. Okay.
Usually, but sometimes if something pops up and we need to know about it and it's on the weekly recap, then we'll talk about it.
Okay. And Marlo, I won't pick on you for that yet.
Okay,
any
you.
questions?
I've only been here a couple of weeks, so I've never used this. Sorry.
Exactly. So no, that's why I said I'm not going to pick on you because this is brand new to you. So, but feel free if you need clarification as we're going through this and say, wait a minute, what are you talking about with that? Feel free to speak up and ask those questions.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Melody, or if someone else shares that you need clarification on.
Okay.
All right. Let's take a look at an actual example of the tracker, and this is just a little clip from the Lane Practices SPO tracker, or systematic payouts. I have a tendency to call it what it used to be called by the acronym, but if you go to look for it on Connect, it's actually called systematic payouts. As we step into this, let's go ahead and take another poll question. And what I'd like to find out is, do you title the SPO account type consistently? So if we're able to pop up that poll question, if everyone would answer that one, everyone who's had an opportunity to work on the tracker. All right, so yes, you're using consistency in the SPO account type. And that is helpful, having standardized language. So that's that third column in the SPO account type. Third column in on what we have of a snapshot because we didn't include the client name field for confidentiality reasons. But the third column on our slide is the SPO account type, and it just helps to have consistency on whether it's a one account versus the SPS accounts that are not a one and that type of thing. And then getting into what Melody brought up a little earlier, I have another poll question for this, and then we're going to take a little closer look at the other information that we're seeing on our slide here. So the next poll question I have is, does your practice use systematic cells for funding SPOs? And we'll watch for the results of that. And yes, everybody uses systematic cells. So let's talk about that. How are your teams tracking those? So first of all, Melody, I'd like for you to share again. And you can use, you've got a couple of them showing on the screen here that give an example of how you do that. So if you wouldn't mind repeating how you go about tracking if it is funded by a systematic cell.
Right. Well, like I said, I focus on that account type column, and if it is an SPS, then I always look for arrangements. And if, in fact, it is coming from a fund, I always note it in details. If it's not coming from a fund, then I note that in details as well, so that I know I've already looked, and it's not. So if it is an annual SPO and it is coming from a fund, then I always recheck that when it comes time to update them again to make sure it's still coming out of the same fund, that it hasn't changed.
Okay. And in your, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say the ones that have a monthly draw, I don't check every single month to see if it's coming out of the same fund, but I do check that maybe on a quarterly basis.
Okay. All right. And your case managers are who determines or works with the advisor to determine the fund, correct?
Right.
So if you see it getting low, let's, if we use the 1, 2, 3, 4th one down on our slide, so account number 1301, and so it's coming, there's a fund FRVAX that it's coming out of, and it looks like we have a little less than 2 draws left.
Right.
So in that case, do you then go to your case managers and say, hey, we're getting low in this fund, and then they take it from there?
Well, when I send them the email letting them know that I've updated the SPO tracker, if there's clients on there that need immediate attention, I always let them know in that email.
Okay. And then if it's needing attention, they would just do they go in and look at the details and know what fund it's coming from? Or you note that in your email to them to take a look at that fund, or how is that communicated?
No, they look at the tracker, and they go by the tracker.
Okay, great. So you're both pulling out from, they're not looking just at the email, they're going to the tracking tool as well.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. And you all will notice that, for example, the bottom line on our example on the slide is showing another fund that it's coming out of, and there's plenty in it, but the reason we want to keep taking a look at those funds is that what if the client decides suddenly they need some cash and it ends up getting pulled from that fund, and that fund runs really low and cannot make the SPO, the next one, then the advisor is going to have to take a look and say, what fund do we want to switch it to? Because if the fund runs too low, it won't matter if there's the ability to fund it through something else in the account. If that fund's not selling and replenishing, then you're going to be kind of firefighting. How about any other teams? How are you guys tracking systematic cells? Do you do it similarly, or do you have another way of doing it? Tara or Carrie, have you guys handled it similarly, or?
So
you might have us muted. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So actually, Amber Hill, our paraplanner, does this. She tracks it and stuff. All I do is just update it. So she I feel kind of helpless right now because she's not on the call and she's the one who does this in our practice. Sorry.
Oh, that's fine. Oh, no, that's fine. That's perfect answer. No worries. Anyone else want to share anything different that they do with that? All right, something I wanted to ask, which is not specific to this piece as far as completing the tracker and looking at the funds, but how are your teams, and I'll ask this of you, Melody, first, how are you guys accounting for inactive accounts? So how do you catch if an SPO, I should say, has gone inactive?
Excuse me. When I'm updating the tracker, and I pull up a client, and that's still on the tracker, but maybe that account is no longer showing in client viewer, then I email the case managers just to confirm with them that this, in fact, is inactive and it's okay to take it off the tracker.
Okay, great.
When, looking at client viewer, I see myself that, I can take it off, but I just want to get confirmation from them before I do that.
Okay. What prompts you to look at client viewer? Are you just, as far as, do you go into the all arrangements every time you're refreshing every line item, or when are you looking at the all arrangements?
Well, I look at the arrangements for any client who has an SPS account, and then I look if I'm looking for someone that's on the tracker and I do not see it in client viewer, then I look at arrangements to see, has this SPO started coming out of a different account and they just didn't notate it on here.
Gotcha. So your case managers will put notes in the details to you as well if something changes? Sometimes. That's why you check it, to be sure.
Right.
Okay. Another place that most practices find really helpful for accounting for inactive accounts is when they're completing the CMOT. So one of the drop-down boxes in the CMOT is for the SPO tracker. And at that point, as you're doing meeting follow-up and completing a CMOT item, the SPO tracker should be checked against the all arrangements and make sure that nothing's gone inactive, or if it has, like Melody said, you want to make sure it was supposed to go inactive, because every once in a while something funky will happen on the home office side and it'll somehow trigger it to go inactive and it wasn't supposed to. So we want to make sure that when you're completing the CMOT, those who are responsible for that role definitely go and check the SPO tracker and check client viewer for all arrangements and make sure that everything's copacetic there. Any other comments on that related to inactive accounts or how anyone is tackling, capturing if an account has gone inactive, or an SPO has gone inactive, rather? All right. Anybody else have anything to share on what kind of info you put into the details column? Something that might be helpful, that you find helpful in using the details column? All right. Well, it sounds like maybe everybody's kind of using it similarly or gleaning from what we're talking about today. Melody, if you would please, the expert results here, these are the benefits you've found in using it. Would you share with us a little bit about these?
Yes. Well, before I was working with KMG, I worked with an advisor for 9 years that, we didn't have trackers to monitor SPOs. And he just went by the emails that he got from the home office. And I think we all know that sometimes advisors don't always stay on top of their emails. And so a lot of those did slip through the cracks. And when we started working with KMG, this was a lifesaver for the practice. It really helps us to stay on track of them and to monitor them. The advisors and the case managers really appreciate having it because they know themselves that they're not always on top of their emails, and so they know they have this to back them up.
Mm-hmm. Good. It does help, as you have listed here, some things you had shared with us. It helps in monitoring it accurately. Staying, like you said, staying on top of it, and you've shared about all the other points on here, so I'll ask, does anyone else have any other benefits you'd like to add? Anything that you have found to be advantageous in using this tracker?
I can add something.
Yeah, great.
I would say also I think it really helps that you don't have to kind of keep track of all of it. It kind of just red flags things that have to be seen at that point. Doing it once a month would be a lot better than having to either do it all the time or forgetting to do it. So I definitely agree with the points before as well. So.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, I appreciate you sharing all of that. All right. Now I'd like to open it up a little bit more for group discussion and asking, has anybody else added any kind of preference piece to the process? Anything that you have found that has made it more effective for you and your use of it, whether it's in the way you go about pulling the cash balances or whatever piece of it there may be? All right, I'll ask a prompted discussion question then. If an SPO from an account is funding other accounts that have SPOs, how is that being tracked? For example, and this is if any of you have this happening, and I'm guessing somebody does. For example, if you have an active portfolio account that has a systematic payout that's going to a one account, and then the one account has a systematic payout from it to a bank, for some reason it was set up as a two-step process, how are you tracking that chain of payouts? Can anyone speak to that? And a tag on to that would be if you have an account that has multiple SPOs. How do you track that? So let's say it's a one account and you have 3 different SPOs going out. One's going to a bank, one's going to a mortgage payment, and the other is, maybe a check directly somewhere else. If you have multiple payouts from one account, Melody, do you have any of those?
We have some clients who have multiple payouts coming from the same account, and we just list each SPO individually on the tracker.
Okay, and then how do you account for keeping an eye on it? So let's say you have a $10,000 cash balance and you've got a few different items going out that may exceed that $10,000. How do you watch for those multiple line items? Do you just look at everyone every single month and make sure,
yes.
Or how do you? Okay.
Yes.
Right, yeah, because the tricky part of that is if you're not looking at every single line item, if you have them listed separately and they're all coming from the same account, there definitely could be a piece where it looks like one is covered, but it's not because the other one is pulling as well. So you got to keep a close eye on it if you do it that way. And an alternate way of doing it is to put the total all in one line item, and then in the details put, you know, this amount goes to the bank, this amount goes to the mortgage company, and even if it's on different dates, it helps you once a month to see what's happening with all of it. Does anybody else have any other ways they've been tackling that? All right. Anything else that anybody would like to ask Melody or one another? All right, and I'd like to just remind you on our next slide of the resource. Kind of like there's an app for that. There's a guide for that. So if you go to Turnkey Solutions and the Client Experience folder, and then within that, the Practice Tracking folder, you will find the ownership guide that steps you through how, best practices on how to complete this tracker. All right. I really appreciate everybody's time today. Does anybody have any other questions? Just give you one more shout out there to say, does anybody have questions for one another? All right. Well, we will